Hi, this is 60 for 30, a budget Magic the Gathering project that looks to get you a playable 60 card deck for right around $30. Today, we're going to be looking at an archetype that I call Baltimore. And what it does is it preys on one of the fundamental rules of making budget Magic decks. And what do I mean by that? I mean that when you're building a budget deck, you need something that is the edge, something that gives you an advantage over the decks that are frankly playing better cards than you. You don't want to bring a knife to a gunfight. You want to not show up for the gunfight. So how we're doing this today is with a card that I love, probably my favorite Magic card of all time, Isochron Scepter. It's an artifact for 2, and when you play it, you exile an instant card from your hand with mana cost 2 or less. And then for the rest of the game, you can pay 2 and tap Isochron Scepter to cast that spell. Isochron Scepter is not a hidden card. People know that it offers incredible value. Putting something like a Lightning Bolt or a Path to Exile on it, and being able to Path or Bolt every turn is going to get you a long, long way. The problem being that sometimes just getting obscene value out of a card isn't really enough. So what we're doing today with our budget Magic is we're looking for unfair value. This is what I mean when I talk about the edge. We need to not show up to the gunfight with a knife. So look at Fog, for example. It's a bad card. No one should put Fog in a deck unless they have a very specific reason to, because you're essentially just delaying your death by a turn. However, if you get to cast Fog every turn, thanks to Isochron Scepter, you're going to have a hard time losing some matchups against some decks in Modern. Same thing with Silence. Silence is a bad card, even though it looks amazing. Your opponents can't cast spells this turn. You land a turn 2 Isochron Scepter, exile Silence, and from turn 3 on, your opponents can't cast spells on their turn because you cast Silence on the beginning of their turn every time. You're going to win a lot of free games against decks that are running more expensive and better cards than you. However, as I mentioned, the problem with that is that Fog and Silence are bad cards in a vacuum. If you just draw Fog and can't staple it to an Isochron Scepter, it's not going to get you very far, which is where Baltimore comes in. Because we're going to play a lot of charms. The key charm City is also the nickname of Baltimore. That's where that cute little nickname comes in. Just humor me. Dawn Charm gives you the option to Fog, but it can also regenerate a target creature or counter a spell that targets you. So if you're about to be bolted for lethal, Dawn Charm is useful. If you're about to lose a key creature, Dawn Charm is useful. If you staple it to an Isochron Scepter and make your opponent's attacks useless for the rest of the game, Dawn Charm is useful. So building off of Dawn Charm and Isochron Scepter, that brings us to the core of our deck, these 3 cards. Muddle the Mixture isn't a great card by itself. It's a decent counter spell. For 2 blue, you counter an instant or sorcery, but we're going to almost always use it for its transmute ability. The reason being that for just 3 mana, we can get either part of this combo, since they both cost 2 mana. We pay 3 mana, we discard Muddle the Mixture, and we can get either Dawn Charm or Isochron Scepter, whichever one we're missing, out of our deck. And while doing that on turn 3 will feel bad, landing our lock on turn 4 is going to feel great. So in addition to those spells, these are some other fairly decent spells that become very good if you get the chance to put them on an Isochron Scepter. If you're playing a deck like Living End or Titan Shift, a negate stapled to an Isochron Scepter is going to absolutely ruin them. If you're playing a creature-heavy deck, Essence Scatter, they can't cast creatures anymore unless they do 2 a turn, and you're just going to come way ahead on tempo and value. Echoing Truth against a token deck, you return all those tokens to their hand every time, gets really brutal. And Disdainful Stroke against a deck like Tron, they can't cast spells with converted mana cost 4 or greater with that stapled to an Isochron Scepter, because you can repeat the value. And they're all decent spells on their own. So playing blue gives us access to those spells and these creatures. Delver of Secrets, since we're going to be playing lots of instants in our deck, is going to flip very often and give us a quick, heavy tempo clock. And we can also play Talrand if we want, so that every time we use Scepter to cast a spell, we're also getting a 2/2 flying creature token. We're also going to have access to some pretty good white spells. Disenchant is going to be useful coming out of the sideboard in most cases, because most of the hate cards for Scepter are artifacts or enchantments. Condemn on a Scepter makes it very hard for your opponents to ever attack you effectively, and is a good removal spell for 1 mana. Raise the Alarm in some fringe cases is going to give decks a lot of problems when you're getting 2 1/1 white soldier tokens every turn. And I already mentioned how effective Silence can be if it's stapled to an Isochron Scepter. Blue and white also gives us access to Reflector Mage, which is a powerful tempo creature, and Azorius Charm, which is another Charm City, another versatile card, and another way to have a lock piece, because its third ability is to put target attacking or blocking creature on top of its owner's library. And don't think of this as a bad way to remove a creature, since your opponent's going to get it back. Think about this as a way to make sure that they never draw another card for the rest of the game, because they're always going to be redrawing the creature that you put on top of their deck with Azorius Charm. It can get absolutely brutal. However, we're not just playing a blue-white deck. We have a few variations of Baltimore that we can choose from: Baltimore Red, Baltimore Black, or Baltimore Green, in addition to the normal blue-white version. So we're always going to play blue-white, but we can splash red for some fairly effective cards. Young Pyromancer, like Talrand, is going to give us a token every time that we cast a spell, which we will be doing a lot with our Isochron Scepter and the way that the deck is structured. Gutter Snipe, similarly, hits your opponent for 2 damage every time you cast a spell. We also get access to a lot of really strong cards once we add red. We have Incinerate or Lightning Bolt, if you can afford the Lightning Bolts. They're a few bucks a piece. We're staying on a budget. Incinerate works great. Boros Charm is absolutely vital in a red deck because it deals 4 damage if you want it to, which is a very fast clock if you staple it to a Scepter. You can save their removal spell that targets your Isochron Scepter by giving your Scepter indestructible until the end of turn with its second ability, or if you have creatures out, you can give them double strike for a big shift in the battle. Izzet Charm is similarly very versatile, and Smash the Smithereens is amazing against pretty much any artifact deck out of the sideboard. Imagine that stapled to a Scepter. When you're playing Affinity, you're killing a creature or a land or an artifact every turn and doing 3 damage to them. The other option, we can play Baltimore Black, so we're playing blue, white, and black, Esper colors. You get access to Tasigur and Gurmag Angler, which are very efficient creatures since we'll almost always be able to delve them out early, and they just provide very big, fat bodies. Tasigur also gives us a lot more card advantage with his ability, which we can use since we're going to be running blue in the deck. We also get access to removal spells like Victim of Night or Bile Blight, which is particularly good against token decks. We have some hate against graveyards in cards like Shred Memory, which also transmutes as another way to tutor up our combo pieces. And don't forget, we're still going to have the Dawn Charm and Isochron Scepter lock in all of these versions of these decks. And we also have Dimir Charm, which not only can destroy a lot of creatures in Modern, because it destroys target creature with power 2 or less, can not only counter target sorcery spells, but when it's on a Scepter, at the beginning of each one of your opponent's turns, you can look at the top 3 cards of their library, pick which one goes back on top, and put the other 2 in the graveyard, which serves not only as an alternate win condition in a very stalled game, since we can mill them out with Dimir Charm, but we're also essentially playing Lantern Control at that point, because we are picking what our opponent draws for the rest of the game. Baltimore Green, if you want to go away from the control and burn routes a bit more and just play creatures, if that's your style, you can play Baltimore Green, which is blue, white, green. Seeker of the Way is technically a white card. We can play it in any Baltimore deck, but it's particularly good in Baltimore Green because of the charms that we'll be playing, which I'll talk about later. We're going to have ways to give him +3/+3 until the end of turn, which, given his prowess and his ability, turns him into a 2-mana 6/6 lifelink creature, which is insanely efficient. Loxodon Smiter is just a great all-around creature for 3 mana. Hooting Mandrills, like Gurmag Angler, gives us a way to get a big creature out that when we pump up will be a 7/7 or 6/6 trampler. And then Invisible Stalker is our, if the game gets really stalled, we have a way to break through win condition, because we can also pump him up and turn him into a fairly quick clock. Something that I want to talk about here is that a lot of games will get very stalled with your Dawn Charm Scepter combo lock, so you need to be able to win the game through a stalled board state, which Invisible Stalker does in Baltimore Green, Dimir Charm can do in Baltimore Black, and Gutter Snipe can do in Baltimore Red, or just a Lightning Bolt stapled to a Scepter. So in Baltimore Green, we're going to have access to Simic Charm, which can pump our creatures, give permanents we control hexproof until the end of turn to save our creatures or our Isochron Scepter from removal, or it can bounce a creature to its opponent's hand, which is super, super good, again, on an Isochron Scepter or by itself. Selesnya Charm pumps creatures, makes tokens, or removes giant creatures that they have. Dromoka's Command can do a ton of stuff. It can make our creatures permanently bigger with +1/+1 counters. It can negate burn spells. It can make an opponent sacrifice an enchantment, Stony Silence, and it can remove creatures when our larger creatures fight them. And then Tel Jalad Justice is a good card to staple to a Scepter against an artifact matchup, since you're going to be scrying and destroying as many artifacts as you want. The cool part about this archetype is that the decks have a lot of overlap. So in the comments section or the description, I have a link to these budget deck lists that I use. Baltimore Red, it's listed around $42. If you don't have the Boros Charms and Lightning Bolts in there, which you can get away with, it's much cheaper. I just really like that version, so I was okay raising the price a little bit. But a lot of these cards have the same core of Isochron Scepter and Dawn Charm, and blue and white, and negates. So if you buy one of them, you have a lot of the cards that go into the other one. So even though individually they all cost about $30 in the paper world, or $5 online, if you want to get them all together, all three decks, you can do that for right around $66 in the paper world, or less than $10 online. You can play these three versatile decks online for less than $10, which is absolutely bonkers and insane value. Some deck notes. This deck is very strong. I tested 10 games with the different variations that I had. Not 10 each, 10 total. I work, I don't have that much time. And they had a combined 8-2 record, and I had some hilarious games where decks scooped on turn 2, given the Dawn Charm Isochron Scepter lock. They just didn't have a way around it. I had a game where I actually lost game 1, but I stalled so long until they found an answer for the lock that they only had 2 minutes of their timer left. So they surrendered because even though they won game 1, they had no way of playing games 2 and 3. I had games where it looked like I was going to lose, and then I top deck a Dawn Charm to staple to the Isochron Scepter. I had games where I won game 1 without them ever seeing the Scepter, so they didn't bring any hate cards, and then I absolutely hosed them with it on game 2. So some things, it played very well. I'm very happy with how each of these decks performs. I think Baltimore Red went 3-1, Baltimore Black went 3-0, and Baltimore Green went 2-1 over the games that I tested. So some deck notes, because it's not necessarily the easiest deck to play. There are a lot of decisions that you have to make and a lot of things you have to be aware of. Sideboarding is important. They will bring in hate cards for Isochron Scepter, so you need a way to deal with their hate cards. The games are long and drawn out. That's why Mana Leak isn't a great card. You think stapling Mana Leak to an Isochron Scepter, you can counter essentially everything they ever play, but we don't win very quickly, so they can eventually just afford to pay that 3 mana. The decks are built so that you can certainly win without Isochron Scepter, and like I said, if you can pull that off game 1, they won't be prepared for Isochron Scepter game 2. So if you're about to win and then you draw Isochron Scepter, you don't need to play it. You don't need to tell them that that's what you have in your deck. As far as picking which one of the 4 decks you want to play, just the blue-white version, or if you want to splash red, black, or green, figure it out. They all play very differently. They all have strong, unique styles, and they all feel great. So figure out what works for you and tweak the deck to your taste. I'm going to provide deck lists that I use, but if you want to sub out a Victim of Night for a Funeral Charm, if you want to put in more Bile Blights because you play against a lot of token decks, if you don't like the way that Azorius Charm plays, you can take it out. You do you. The most important thing about the deck is knowing your matchups and your win conditions. If you're ahead, you need to know what card you need to be afraid of that can turn the tide in their favor, and you need to know how you're going to win a game when you're behind or if you're ahead, and you need to be aware of all the threats to your deck. Speaking of which, that brings us to the threats to the deck. These are the most played cards in Modern, in sideboards, and in the main decks that really threaten what we're doing. Kolaghan's Command can destroy an artifact. Ratchet Bomb can destroy any permanent. Abrupt Decay can destroy any permanent. And Stony Silence is a well-known artifact hose card. and they'll be playing a lot of artifact host cards because Affinity is one of the more popular decks in Modern. We also have to worry about engineered explosives, shatter effects, and pithing needle. Those are really the main offenders. Good for us with our negates and our Dromoka's commands and our disenchants. We have a lot of ways to deal with artifacts, enchantments, and non-creature spells. So just because they have sideboard options against us doesn't mean they're always going to work. So this is a budget deck. However, you can certainly make it stronger by dishing out a lot more money. Snapcaster Mage is good in any blue deck, especially where we play lots of cheap instants instants like we do. Geist of St. Traft, even though he's a white-blue card, is absolutely bonkers in the Baltimore green deck, because if you're making him a 5/5 hexproof creature when he attacks, he's not going to just die when he attacks, and you'll get to attack with him repeatedly. Tarmogoyf is good in any green deck, and Monastery Mentor works like a much better young Pyromancer, where we're getting tokens with prowess, which can be absolutely bonkers. We also have access to Hurkyl's Recall, which can absolutely set an artifact deck way behind. Imagine trying to play Affinity against a deck that's casting Hurkyl's Recall every turn. Path to Exile, stapled to an Isochron Scepter, is almost a lock against a lot of decks because you're going to kill all their creatures. Lightning Helix is a great way to race a deck because you're gaining life and killing creatures and doing direct damage to them. And Angel's Grace is kind of a different kind of silence. I wouldn't main deck Angel's Grace, but if you want to, you can. And you can make it so you can never lose the game on their turn, and they have to be able to kill you at instant speed, which a lot of decks just can't do. Then there's Fatal Push, good black removal, and obviously the land base. Since we're going to be playing a lot of 3-color decks, fetch lands and shock lands are important, and they will break your bank, but it will be worth it in the long run if you want to invest in making this a highly competitive deck. And that's it. That's Modern Baltimore. That's Charm City. That's Isochron Scepter playing in the most unfair way possible. I love these decks, all of them, all play well. I think that they're extremely competitive for budget decks, and with the upgrades they can be extremely competitive in general. They offer a lot of versatility, a lot of outplays for you to pull off against your opponent. A lot of the games that you lose feel like your fault when you lose them because you just didn't play it right. The deck has enough tools that it has that we can win any game feeling. It wins a lot of games game 1 on turn 2 because your opponent just doesn't have an answer. It has a lot of reliability and redundancy with the Muddle the mixtures to tutor up your combo pieces. And it just gets there. It's cheap, it's fun, it can be upgraded, it's good if it's upgraded, it's good if it's not upgraded, and I can't say enough things about Baltimore as an archetype. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, comment. I'll get back to you, I promise. Tell your friends to watch, and have fun out there, guys and gals. That's what it's all about.